Well, today we have a real privilege, one that I've looked forward to for some time, to talk about one of the industries that's come, in this case, to the Red Deer area that's had a significant, long-standing impact on our community, and that's the plant, the NOVA plant at Joffre, just east of Red Deer. So we have two gentlemen who've been attached to a part of that, the growth of that plant over a significant period of time, Bob Caple and Al Poole. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about it. I'm disappointed because our Rotary Club had a meeting out there about 2 months ago, and I was unable to be a part of it. But those of us in Red Deer have always, particularly in my case, as I look at the Joffre Road that had to be built to connect Red Deer to the plant, is right outside our front window. And so we get to see the traffic and the ambulances and the police cars and so on that go by. I'm not sure where they end up, but we know roughly where they're going. But
well, what's Highway 11 now was a gravel road when we first started, right? Yeah.
Mud.
Yeah, it was a mud road. So it was...
had trouble getting up that hill from the river.
Yeah.
You used to sit on the top, take turns taking a run, and you'd fishtail all the way up. And we had a couple of farmers that would sit at the top with their tractor. And if you went over the edge, they'd pull you out. It was
unreal, yeah.
It was something else.
Yeah, it was. Now, we did have a better road if you wanted to go around by Black Falls, right? That was paved. But it took a while for the other one.
That east bridge has been there a long time.
Yeah.
It's actually two bridges. The new one is the much higher one, and you don't have to dip as much. You can still see the parts of the old one.
The old one, yeah.
I remember going out there as a youngster, building a house just on the other side.
Okay.
We didn't hit the mud road too often, but it was just as the field was opening up, and this chap was quite pleased because he had surface rights and mineral rights, and he was smiling. He was a smiling farmer.
Well, I remember my interview. I chose not to go out to the site. We were interviewed in town with Wolf Hamilton and I don't know some others. And I chose not to go out to the site. I mean, I've seen plants before, and when I started. I remember it was December the 3rd, I think. We went to Banff for a week for ISD. Mm-hmm. But I went out to the site and I went out that dirt road and I thought, what the heck did I do here? I thought I was in Central Alberta, driving down a mud road to get to work.
Well, it's changed since.
Oh, immensely.
Bob, as we were just chatting, perhaps you'd tell us a bit about how you came to Red Deer.
I first came to Red Deer in about 1943. My dad was in the Air Force, stationed at Penhold. So we lived just...
So you were 20 then, right?
South, yeah, I was older than most. Anyhow, I lived, we just lived south of the river. When my dad got out of the Air Force, my mother really wanted to stay here. She loved Red Deer. But my dad had a promise of a job in a steel plant back east, so we ended up back east. For me to get here, I worked in the same steel plant my dad did.
Which one was that?
Algoma Steel at that time.
In Sault Ste.
I don't know
Marie.
what it's called now, pardon me?
In Sault Ste. Marie.
Sault Ste. Marie, yes. And it was highly unionized. Had 5 unions, and it was not a very fun place to work. So I started looking elsewhere and saw this ad for Alberta Gas Ethylene as an HR manager. I didn't even know what ethylene was. But anyhow, I applied for it and was lucky enough to get the job, and I came out here December 1st of 1977. Got off the plane in Calgary. It was chilly. Next morning, I signed on at the company headquarters in Calgary. It was a little chillier. came up to Red Deer. It was really cold,
Chinook had
really cold. And we set up shop downtown. At that time, we were partnering with Dow Chemicals in building the first plant out of Joffre. And Dow had an office downtown, and we set up next to them. And from there, my boss, Bud Clark, who was the vice president, we set out hiring the first group of managers. And then with the managers, we hired our first group of employees. We made a couple of mistakes along the way, but we hit him hard enough that he came around. No, we actually spent a lot of time in selecting employees, and it was the right thing to do in hindsight. At the time, we thought it was right, but maybe not so sure. But at the end of the day, selecting good employees is really critical. It was a startup operation, so there was no culture that was there before, and we were able to work on our own as a group. And it was exciting, a lot of fun.
So the Joffre plant then got started about 1977?
Actually, they started construction in '76. The determination to work on the project, to build that project, was set up with Alberta Gas trunk line under Bob Blair and Peter Lougheed back in '75. They designed the project, approved the project, started the shovel in the ground in '76.
And what was the concept behind it? Like what was it to do?
Well, it was to get into the petrochemical business. At one time, all of our gas and whatnot was shipped east. So the jobs were all down there in Sarnia, in places like that. And Lougheed's focus, along with Bob Blair, was to build Alberta. And so Lougheed's approach was, we're not going to send jobs down the line anymore. We're going to start building it here. And we'll start with this one plant. And that's how it began.
I think even one of the most interesting things around that was Lougheed also, because the model was Chem Valley and Sarnia, right? And he at the time said, okay, we're not going to repeat that same thing in Alberta. We're not going to have everything in one spot. We're going to have it diversified. And that led to, again, the ethane come out of the straddle plants. One was at Empress and the other one was over by Cochrane, so that brought the ethane. So then they had to look at it was rail lines and river water were the two big issues. So that left you with Edmonton, Calgary, or Red Deer. And Red Deer ended up being the successful location on that, and again, I think that whole thing that Lougheed laid out there was quite remarkable. And that was also, it was going to be Canadian owned, because Dow was the originators of the whole petrochemical idea. So he wanted this company to be owned by a Canadian company, and that's when Bob Blair stepped up with the Alberta Gas trunk line, and they created what was then the Alberta Gas Ethylene Company. That was the genesis of that site and that industry in Alberta.
Well, ethane is C3?
6.
C6. So it was designed to either get sent to at C6 or C6.
Or sorry, C2. It's a C2. Ethane is a C2. So it's a component that was in natural gas, which typically was just being shipped out of the province. So part of the infrastructure was they had to build what they called straddle plants that processed that natural gas and pulled out the ethanes, propanes, and butanes that had higher value elsewhere. And in the case then, the ethane was shipped to Joffre, where we cracked it into ethylene. And ethylene is basically the basic fuel stock for all of the petrochemical industry.
That's the source of plastic?
Yes, yeah.
And that's what it's still doing today?
It is, yeah. It is.
I guess the other concern I've always had from a community perspective is how long is this going to continue? I mean, do you run out of gas? Do you run out of gas sources because wells go dry?
Yeah, how long is it going to last? I guess they still look at, they find different ways of getting more ethane. So we have an abundance of natural gas yet in this province. There's some ethane comes out of the processing of some of the stuff in the tar sands, Fort McMurray area. So I would expect it's going to be around for, a few decades yet.
Well,
even the last year here, I think Dow indicated that they were going to triple the size of their site in Fort Saskatchewan, which was something like a $10 billion expenditure. So that would tell you that the petrochemical industry is going to be alive and well in Alberta for,
Would you have
I'd say, several decades.
Is there competition for C2 here in the province? Or are you the primary recipient?
I don't think for getting
Extractor.
into the kind of business we're in.
No, I don't. At one time, some ethane was used for some missable floods in the oil field, but I don't think that's around anymore. So I would think that we're the prime users for ethane. And again, it's a value add, right? So that's always what makes.
The Joffre plant became the hub for the rest of the projects that began. And Joffre became the largest producer from a single site of ethylene in the world. And so I think it'll be around for a while. The original group of senior people saw this as a plant that would stay around for generations and provide that kind of employment. And it grew. Originally, the thinking was, well, we'll build one plant, see what happens. Then we build a second one. Then we build polyethylene. Then we build a second polyethylene. Then we build a hog. And then a co-generator. And I don't know what the employment numbers are there now. Al, it was 700 when I left.
Yeah, we were somewhere just over 700 when I left in 2009. So my guess is they've added some to that because there has been some expansion. So, so that's 700 plus good paying jobs, as well as a contract base. It was probably 300 or 400 people.
Is this just at the NOVA plant? Or is that all of the plants?
No, that's just on the Joffre site. Yeah.
Just on the Joffre site? Well, there's many more plants, and perhaps you'd tell me a bit about some of the daughter plants that have grown up because of the source of ethylene that's available.
Well, Union Carbide built the hell do they call it now?
It was ethylene glycol, wasn't it?
Ethylene glycol, that's what I was trying to think of. And then I think Dow owns that now.
Yeah, Dow took over that site.
But there were plants up in Edmonton that took our ethylene. And of course there's spin-offs from that, and I don't know what they are. I've been out of the thing for over 20 years now.
Yeah, so some of the spin-off would be the Agrium site that sits close to the Joffre location. So they get pure hydrogen stream from NOVA Chemicals, and then they get a pure nitrogen stream from the Prentice site, the Dow site, and then they run it through a process that ends up making anhydrous ammonia. It's a very small looking little plant, but it's a world scale in terms of the volume that it makes.
For those of us who only drive by and see the steam coming out of the pipes and the chimneys and think it's pollution, we really don't understand what goes on within the plant or plants.
Yeah, most of what people see visibly is just water vapor coming off the cooling towers.
Yeah.
Occasionally people will see when there's a plant upset, they may see a flare, which has a flame, but I guess the good news on that is that just means everything's controlled, right? Yeah. So there's no hazard beyond it. And I know we've continued, I'm still talking like I'm there, we've spent years, looking at reducing leaks, fugitive emissions, kind of things like that. So, and that's just an ongoing process that they keep getting better and better at over time.
The whole focus at Joffre was around safety, and not just the employees, but the community and the plant itself. So a great deal of time was spent on doing the best we could around protecting employees, the equipment, the process. Like Al says, what you see coming off steam. It's just like you're boiling the kettle and you see steam come off it. The other thing that we had was waste heat, and we piped that down to a greenhouse where they grew tomatoes and cucumbers.
Yeah.
Is that still operating?
No,
I don't know.
No. I think that ended somewhere around the time when E3 came, so somewhere around the 2000s. And part of that came about as we overhauled, so improved the technology on some of our first furnaces, which we had a lot of internal heat recovery, so we didn't have the waste heat to send to the greenhouse any longer. Actually, when the greenhouse finally did shut down, it was running, they were growing spruce seedlings. It was some outfit out of BC. I can't remember the name now.
They're the ones who bought it.
Yeah.
They made poinsettias at Christmas time. They grew those.
Yeah.
Anyhow, my whole point around that is build on El's point. As we tried as hard as we could, as much as we could, not to let things leave the plant. That we can maximize using whatever we had from the process. It was a byproduct of the process internally somehow. And frankly, I think we did a hell of a job doing that. The safety record at NOVA was outstanding.
Yeah.
DuPont was the leader in safety at one time, but we think they cheated. We were better.
Just the way you counted
We worked at it, that's for sure.
Well, I'm missing his name, but the chap who was head of the museum and board here before me was one of the safety managers at NOVA. And I just remember thinking, how do you merge a safety consciousness with brilliance? Because this guy was articulate and bright and thoughtful, and he could foresee. And I remember one of the things that came out of it was the company wanted traffic lights at the corner of 40th and Highway 11.
Yeah.
But it was because of safety.
Yes.
And getting employees safely to the plant.
If I remember correctly, we paid for the installation of those lights and took it out in trade by getting the DAW Center for a day for employees for a number of years. So I can't remember what the dollars were, but it wasn't, at least by our standards, it wasn't crazy. But we did pay for the lights there at 30th and what is now Highway 11, I guess.
30th.
Yep.
So
I guess that's the part where I think, there's the jobs and all the actual work out there. I suppose there was a bit of a sore spot with the city of Red Deer in that it didn't benefit from any of the tax structure. That all went to the county of Lacombe.
Is that still true?
It's still true today. But there's still, most of the employees live in Red Deer, and I would argue that most of the employees have been very active in the community. We've participated in big ways with United Way, Red Deer College. So certainly I think the hospital as well was another area of focus for us. So in that way, I think the community has benefited, considerably over the years.
Well, it's if I can go back to my comment before, you said it was world scale, Bob, but what is that in terms of dollars or
No production.
Production volumes. Yeah.
And what would that amount to in I guess in today's dollars, just as a crude indicator?
I wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah, I forget the numbers. NOVA Chemicals at one time was sitting around like a $6 billion on revenue, but that would have been from the east as well. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to check those numbers.
Yeah.
Because we've added, when I retired in 2009 as the site leader, I had the distinction of saying I was the leader of the largest ethylene, polyethylene site in the world. And somewhere shortly after that, someone else took that title, but we got it back because they added another 1 billion pounds on R3 since I left. So, yeah, the numbers are crazy when you're talking about billions of pounds, right? It just, most people, how do you relate to that kind of stuff? And the very first plant that we built, Ethylene 1, was nameplate was something like 1.2 billion pounds of ethylene. Then we added E2, which I think was somewhere around 1.6, and E3 was north of 3. And the old plants, they've all been debottlenecked, and the outputs have certainly increased from those early days.
Would that mean that in terms of production, it's over 6 billion pounds? That's what, per year?
Yeah, you're somewhere. I suspect they're somewhere north of 6 billion pounds on ethylene, and just a bit of a guess, but 3 or 4 billion pounds on polyethylene off that site.
I've been in there for over 20 years.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I don't know what the numbers are.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be specific, but I can see where these numbers have meaning to you. But they really don't in terms of how many plastic bags might that make, or what does it do? It's not comprehensible because the downstream products are so varied.
Yeah.
It's a step in the process, a value added, as you said, step in the process.
Yeah.
I think coming back to the plant, the things to me that are significant are the things like Ethylene 1. The NOVA Chemicals had no experience in petrochemicals. We hired people like Al who came from different plants with different experiences. We had Dow there as coaches, but that ethylene plant, the first one, set a world record in startup. I forget the number of hours. I think it was 20 hours or something in the neighborhood like that.
Yeah.
The second plant, we started up on our own. We set another world record, beat the first record. And my point on all that is the kind of employees that were brought to this city, that live in this city, that are out in the community with different organizations, families that have settled here, their kids are growing up here. And to me, those are kind of important things. We had a local person say one time, "This will be a white elephant. This will never work." I remember his name. I'm not going to share it.
Hope it wasn't Lampard.
But if I ever see him, I'll remind him. Anyhow, it was just a chuckle we used to get when he made that comment. But the point I'm getting at is I think when you're talking about community and the jobs, I couldn't be more thankful to have a part of that, because the majority of the employees we had by far were just outstanding.
Yeah.
They were dedicated. They were professional. They were just great to work with. It's a great site.
Did you find, as you were describing when you first came here, that it was a problem getting somebody to come to a place as far north as Red Deer, and where you're drawing people from outside Alberta and outside Canada?
Yeah, we did some recruiting initially. I remember making some recruiting trips into into Ontario and some into Quebec. And again, that's when we were going through some growth spurts. So
Well, we went to England.
yeah, we actually
We
went,
to
yeah.
England. It came in spurts. Certain professions were hard to come by, like an instrument repair people.
Yeah.
Instrument engineers were tough to find at one time. As far as the plant staff went, once we started Ethylene 1, and I think the word got out, and the employees did a lot to help us to get other employees.
Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah, I don't
Like
remember it
attract
ever
like.
being too much of a problem. I think we had a reputation.
Yeah.
And of course, with Red Deer growing, that helped too,
Yeah.
in terms of getting more professional people coming in. And our proximity to Calgary and Edmonton was also an asset.
You've had a relationship with Red Deer College.
Yes.
Maybe you just describe how that evolved and what it was intended to do, both ways, I guess, for the college and for you. Because in some ways, you are the reason that it's called Red Deer Polytechnic now,
I didn't know that.
arguably because of the technical training that goes on there, which is unusual for a university.
Well, in L's day, they donated $1 million to the technical wing.
Yeah.
Prior to that,
So you mean to build it at the college?
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's how it was spent.
Yeah.
But it was $1 million to
Yeah.
deal with the technical end of it. And when you go up and go through the college, there's an area there that references NOVA.
NOVA Chemicals Common or something like that. Yeah.
Prior to that, Bud Clark was involved with the head of the Red Deer College at the time. I'm trying to remember. his name.
Luderback. Luderback? Ed Luderback?
No, it was before him.
Oh, before Ed. Okay.
Anyhow, so we started off with a good connection with them. I sat on the foundation, and
Is this a NOVA foundation or
No,
No, the
college
college. The college, yeah.
Yeah.
and we donated to the foundation in the early days. They weren't the same numbers as L's group gave. We were probably in the hundreds of thousands, and so we've had a connection with them for a long time, in one way or another. And our company focused on some things, Bob, that education was one of them, health and safety was another. So we gave to the hospital and we gave to the school. It was something ongoing from the day I got here. I got here in '77. So it's been a growing thing.
You're right, because there's a connection like with Lindsay Thurber in some recognition or recognition day or sports that are NOVA based.
The largest donations, as I remember them, go to the hospitals and the college.
Yeah.
The other concerns, we go on a smaller scale, but really continue to focus on the education and the health thing. So it might not be millions of dollars to some organizations. It may only amount to a few thousand or a few hundred. But that's been a focus of the company from the start.
Yep. And that pretty much continues too, as far as I know.
In terms of business, are you headquartered like on the site at, or do you have headquarters here in Red Deer?
No, that's, boy, this is going to be a
Or is
real
that
stretch.
Kind
So
of come and gone.
when I left in '09, the company was sold to an interest out of the Middle East. I think it was IPIC, IPIC. It's a big holding company. And at that point, the operations center continued to be in Pittsburgh. And I believe that's still the case today.
I think so.
We have a senior person, we've always had a senior person in Calgary, so there's always been a presence in Calgary. but they tend to refer as that operating center, which has been in Pittsburgh and continues to be to this day.
So the company is owned offshore, is it?
Yes. And in fact, that's even from IPIC is the holding company that bought it in 2009, and it's changed ownership since then. And I don't have those details, Bob. That you'd have to get someone much newer.
Peripheral.
But from the community point of view, nothing has changed, right? It's still NOVA Chemicals, and that's
Right.
the other part of it is somewhat transparent.
Well, it certainly has had, just in terms of size and obviously in terms of people and dollars, has had a major impact on Red Deer, like far more so than Lacombe or any of the other communities. Whether it's people growing up here and raising their families through the schooling system or using the health facilities or whatever. There's nothing like it. If the question was, what's the next biggest industry that's affected Red Deer, I'm not sure I know it. one could think of, say, something like alpha milk, but
probably after that you get into you're into the public sector, right?
Yes, yeah, places like
hospital, teachers, all that kind of stuff would be the
One other thing.
But there's nothing like it.
No.
I hadn't quite realized, although you're certainly refreshing my mind, that Lougheed went through that diversification formally and consciously, because the community certainly was aware of it, and now they're the government's trying to go through it again because of a number of reasons that we all know.
The other thing that was significant from the follow Lougheed was Bob Blair, president of the NOVA trunk line. His philosophy was buy Alberta and buy Canada as much as you can. So whatever we did at Red Deer, we tried to focus on getting those services and supplies from the Red Deer area. If we couldn't, we tried to get it in Alberta. If we couldn't get it there, we tried to get it in Canada. So it was continually trying to build Alberta and Canada. And that felt like Lougheed's idea of building Alberta, diversifying. Blair's philosophy fell right in line, and so did the company.
Well, he extended that by decentralizing a number of public entities, companies out of Edmonton to all over Alberta. I remember when the Hale board was moved to Lacombe, but part of that same concept to diversify and support smaller communities, which were I guess shriveling up. But I don't know whether he was associated with it or not, but I worked with a chap by the name of Jim Mahaffey. I don't know whether that name rings a bell or not, but I think he was one of the first chairmen of Alberta Gas Trunk. This would be back in the 50s, 60s.
Before my day.
He was sat across the table, the forum from Premier Manning, and Manning quite respected him. So thought one way to get rid of him was to give him a good job. So he gave him the challenge of starting up Alberta Gas Trunk. But just another example of a community impact. I know when I went through university, petroleum engineering was not a popular choice, and very few took it. But when they graduated, they were looking for a job. They came back to the field quite quickly, or learned about it by experience. But maybe I can go to the larger concept, and that is. It's one thing to produce, oil and gas or drill for it and so on, but taking that same concept of creating NOVA, and I don't know whether you're related to naturally occurring or because the oil and gas is here, you develop these subsidiaries and value-added companies, but certainly around Edmonton in particular. It's not just the reason why the Edmonton hockey team's called the Oilers, but
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
that's a huge development around Fort Saskatchewan, and but part of the concept of value added. And I suppose those of us who sit and watch and don't really participate in it say, well, when does this end? And, I guess in some ways it never ends, as long as there's oil and gas being
Oil and
pumped.
gas, yeah.
But I've always felt that originally Alberta was just a driller, but within the industry, Calgary was, at one time was very American, but Calgary has developed, expanded on its own through the people it's brought together and the projects that it's worked on. And is that still occurring or changing? My impression as a layperson is that it's had a very, very substantial impact on the province. And Red Deer is just one example of it. I guess listening to what you've said, I'm rather surprised there hasn't been more oil and gas industry developments around Red Deer, rather than NOVA and the companies around it. But do you have any comments about how Alberta's evolved? Because I think it's now a major player in the industry around the world, rather than just a driller. And
I think things have gone way beyond, what you would have talked about would have been, back in the 60s probably, where it was, everything was about oil rigs and oil, right? Where I think we've gone way beyond that, both in the sense of the size of the petrochemical and associated industries, and then just look at Fort McMurray and the oil sands. The kind of an impact that's had on the province is just massive.
Well, I think too, you can see the big ones, but I think you should look at the offspins of those, the support services, the smaller industries that grew out of that. Because I forget the number. It used to say, I think it was for every job created in Joffre, there were 9 other jobs outside.
Somewhere else, yeah.
That the
suppliers,
yeah.
service providers.
You see the big guys, but I think if you look around the outside, you'll find that if you accumulate all those and tally them up, they're probably just as big, if not bigger, than the invisible ones that you see.
Yeah.
So to me, that just strengthens the economy in Alberta, but also some of these companies grow up and they're sending they build here and they're selling their equipment elsewhere, like Quinn, the instrument people.
Oh, the pumps. Pumps, yeah.
And they have a big presence here in Red Deer, and they're selling down in the States. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
But that to me is what really is significant, is all of the spin-off out of that.
I knew Jim Quinn from Rotary. Just a very nice chap.
Certainly was, yeah.
I gather his family have carried on to some extent with the company.
Yeah, his son has.
But you're right. It's grown, and I as I was saying to Len Radford earlier, if you have a vision, an idea, if you invent and so on, it grows, it expands, and I looked upon Red Deer as really starting from a small halfway in between railway stop between Calgary and Edmonton into creating its own industry, and in particular the concept now, and you can certainly see it on the highway, that the corridor between Calgary and Edmonton is one of the most productive corridors in Canada, centered in Red Deer, with so many of those spin-off effects or industries occurring because of its location, but because of the people that have been come here, brought here, or like the Quinns, their own ingenuity. I think I may have mentioned in a previous discussion that, to my surprise, there was a a Mexican Gulf blowout of a well at a prolific rate. And I can remember reading, I think it was in Time magazine, that the solution to the problem was to drop an umbrella, with I guess weights and so on around the outside on the top of the spouting well, and then suctioning it off to get rid of a lot of the pollution so they could begin to work with it. Yeah. And the idea came from Red Deer. And I remember being surprised and thought, we don't understand, we don't know what some of these impacts are. In your industry, we know even less about them. I think from a Red Deer perspective, I remember the chap from the oil industry who would help raise funds for the United Way. And gosh, he was good at it. And he'd been at it for so many years. He had been identified by the industry as the go-to person. I thought, isn't that neat? Isn't that nice? And isn't that, returning to the community in a way that probably nobody else could have?
Yeah.
But the flip side is those of us not directly associated with it are not nearly as knowledgeable of what goes on behind the brick walls and the entrance gates. But it certainly is remarkably significant in the context that it's to me, an unheralded and in some ways under-recognized part of Canada. I can't say that we will continue to do that, but I've certainly enjoyed it in a different sense, discovering that a chap from Calgary had a worldwide impact on the service organization called Rotary, but he came to Red Deer in 1923. And gave the opening speech on brotherhood and fellowship to the first meeting of the Rotary Club of Red Deer.
Yeah.
His name was James Wheeler Davidson, and in 2 weeks we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of that club and what its impact has been. But as I go back and look at it, it's remarkable. And it's not as if everybody's saying, pat me on the back for doing this, but rather, isn't it amazing? Nobody does that. They're just satisfied with having done what they've done.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we're just not good at sort of sometimes sitting back and reflecting on what's gone on. The province in my lifetime here has doubled in population, and you talk about all the growth along that QE2 corridor is just phenomenal. 30 years ago you'd say, no, that's not going to happen, right? Yeah. And now you're just... Sometimes you actually got to stop and actually take a look at it, right? You get used to just driving by stuff, and it's always been there, right? Well, it wasn't always there. It's like you talked about the city being, when you were a kid, 2,500. Well, it was only 35,000 when I came here in '78, and look where we are now, and the change is phenomenal. And that's not, then you got to look at Sylvan Lake and Lacombe and Black Falls and all the stuff that's gone on. And you go,
But
it's impressive.
For your perspective, I came from Ontario, Northern Ontario. When I came out here for an interview, first time I'd been here since I was a kid, I thought, Jesus, this is really different. This is really different. Even my interview was different. The people that interviewed me, I went home and my wife said, how was the interview? I said, I have no idea. She said, why? I said, they asked me how I can change Canadian business. I never thought of that. How do I do that? How would you do that? Anyhow, the thing about Alberta, to me, was this impression. You have an idea. There's people give you 9 reasons why you should try it. You bring that same idea out in established places in Ontario, they'll give you 9 why you can't. It's just that difference. It's so energetic. It's so, you can talk about stuff that people don't shoot you down for. It's, hell, we tried that before. It's just, that's to me is Alberta. And so coming up with ideas of the tent over a problem and containing it that way, or other ideas that have come out of where we work, doesn't surprise me now. Alberta's just like that. And I hope it never loses it.
I remember Peter Fink So Peter was a Dow guy that had a lot to do with helping us learn our way through all this stuff. And I remember when Peter was leaving, he says, you know, Poole, if you ever repeat this, I'll deny it. But he said, you guys are the best. Simply the best. He says, people are just curious, want to learn, want to get better at doing stuff. And, you know, that was a pretty big compliment coming from a Dow guy, and especially in the Dow world, that thought they were pretty much the best at everything in that line of the industry. So, yeah, that was a heck of a statement, and I think he was right.
You're reminding me that I met Peter through the Rotary Club as well, and what a quiet but scratched just a little significant person he was.
Yeah, he was an impressive guy. Yeah.
Not a local sense or provincial sense, but way beyond that.
He was brilliant.
He was. I learned a lot from him. Yeah, learned a lot from Peter.
Back to your comment earlier, Bob. I can remember when my father tried to start the United Way. He said the problem is that good people come to Red Deer, but they're part of a larger organization. They don't stay. The turnover rate is so high, you know, whether it's in the banks or with the RCMP or who it is. And you can't start something because you don't have the carry-on ability within the community. The bright people are seen to be bright, and they're promoted and they leave. That would be in the 50s and 60s, and that was a huge problem for Red Deer, which was so cyclically influenced by Calgary and Edmonton.
Yeah.
And now you don't see that. It's its own community. It has its own personality. Although I keep thinking, you know, are there more Ron McLeans that I haven't interviewed that I'd like to? Better make a note of that. Grab him the next time he comes to Red Deer.
He's coming through. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll look for some
Local
contacts
boy.
with him.
Yeah, who did well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, this has been just a delight to see a bit of the inside of a huge industry that's impacted Red Deer. And, you know, in some ways, seeing it before and now, as I go through these interviews, seeing it afterwards and seeing where it's not where it is now, but where it's going to.
It was fun to be part of it. So, and part of watching Red Deer grow as well. Yeah. So, it's been incredible. It really has.
Well, NOVA's has been a remarkable part of that story. I think of, I've known some of the, people at the Wisner's party that we met a few more of them, and what an impact they've had. And I thought, there was a time when Red Deer couldn't attract those kind of people, and certainly couldn't keep them. And it's a delight to see it change, but it's also a delight to say, what's the reputation of Red Deer as it finally got past the Eckville teacher who, believed that there never been such a thing as a Holocaust.
Yeah. Well, they had, one of the best things that ever happened to me was my tenure as the site HR community relations guy. It was probably one of the best 6 or 7 years I had, and thanks to this guy, took a chance and gave me that job. But it wasn't just
the stuff. I was threatened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the kind of the work proper. It's also that was sort of the opening for me that really got us out into the community and became more known, I guess. And it was a special time, and it, again, just having that kind of support and encouragement to do those kind of things was get out of the road and let it go. And there's all kinds of people that have continued to do that kind of stuff. So
speaking of remembrance, the farmage group.
Oh yeah, PAL started out PAL, right?
No, pardon me, my throat is shut. But we put together picked a group of farmers that were closest to us, and we had them come in once a month to explain to them what we were doing. And because when they'd see a flare, oh geez, you're waking me up at night with all this noise, and we were waking them up at night. But we wanted them to know what our plans were. We wanted to know you're going to see heavy traffic because of this, you're going to see a flare because of that. And in the beginning, we had some really interesting guys on that committee. I loved every one of them, but they were always suspicious of us in the beginning. Oh yeah, you're just telling us that to get us off your back kind of thing. But over time, it became a really effective and nice working group.
Yeah.
It wasn't terrible at the beginning. It was just awkward getting started.
Yeah.
And I just remember some of the characters on there. The odd time I'd go out in the morning to visit them, I started around, and this one fella, as soon as I walked in, sit down. He'd reach up in the cupboard. Geez, by the time I got back home,
Ready for a nap.
it was a fantastic time. It was, you know what, for me, you could never write a better job and a better time. I had 20 years, 17 years of the best I could ever have.
Yeah, we had a really good relationship with all of our neighbors, you know, and that, you know, there were tough times. And I remember the one family, Petersons, were up on the hill and getting quite a few calls. And I went over once, and I was in the yard, and it was really kind of neat because they had a big hot tub outside, and they'd actually gone to the trouble and had a wood burner on the other side of it, right? And they'd wrapped coils around it to heat this. And it was kind of funny. Mrs. Peterson says, she says, I'm not probably going to regret this, but actually we enjoy the light from the plant at nights when we're out here enjoying this in the wintertime, right? So it's not all bad, right? No, not all bad.
It's hard to miss, but you have to explain it to everybody who comes to your house and sees it. It's so true. Well, it's a delight to think that, you know, people like yourselves have come to Red Deer and have stayed and contributed not just vocationally in your careers, but into the community. I was just thinking of your comment earlier, one of the spin-offs from the farming group, where the two Ellises, the brother and sister, who put together the Ellis Bird Farm. And as I knew a bit about, but I've learned more, they were the creators of the Red Deer Community Foundation when they gave them $1 million to start it through Morris Llewellyn. And, you know, there's another direct spin-off from the Joffre plant and the work at Joffre. I'm sure there's many others, but those are just some of the
ones,
semi-hidden stories that
the one I'm still thinking about is, who's the safety guy that was on the...
I don't know.
The historic board?
Yeah.
You
know, if you said safety, so what was, and it wouldn't be him, Stan...
Dodds.
No, not Stan Dodds.
There's I think a picture with the previous chair people. And
maybe I'd like to see that.
I'll look up his name, and if I don't catch it as we leave here, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
But what an impressive person, to work with, to manage a meeting. I thought, and this guy's focus is safety.
I'm curious.
I thought, there's something unusual about that plant out there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the things we try to do with every meeting was to manage it properly. Meetings can get out of hand. And you waste a lot of time. I won't say we're the best at it, but we worked at it. So that when there was a meeting called, you knew what it was about. You were supposed to focus on it, give the ideas, get a resolution, and get out. Get it done.
Well, that's a good engineering approach. It kind of indirectly reminds me of my brother, who's the brightest and the most successful in our family, was an engineer who failed. In fact, he took engineering because he couldn't pass English. And I had the same problem. It looks like it's a disease that runs in our family. I think my highest mark was 55, and now I'm doing avocationally. I'm just writing for fun and enjoyment.
Yeah, great.
That must have happened a few times. Remember Paul Sloan?
Oh yeah.
He was one of our HR guys, and he always tells a story that he took engineering, and he said it was graduation. He said, okay, we're going to give you this as long as you promise never to practice engineering. So he didn't. He went into HR.
One of my best memories of Algoma, or of NOVA, is going to the cattle auctions.
Oh, yeah, Lacombe. 4-H.
4-H.
4-H auctions, yeah.
First time I went in there, these farmers had me by the nose. I kept trying to bid, and then I didn't know whether they bid it or not. I kept bidding. I think I paid $500,000 for a cow. That was a lot of fun. It was just.
I hope the genes made it profitable.
Oh,
It did.
I look forward to that every year. Every year, those kids work so hard. I'm raising those cattle, and it breaks their heart when they see them leave, and yet they get a good dollar for them. We made sure of that.
There's the reciprocal of that. I lived in Red Deer, and we had a farm just where the Ollie Mill plant is now.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And we used to go out there and raise, cattle and hay and whatever else. We tried to join the 4-H club, and they wouldn't let us in because we had a city address. So I missed that.
That experience.
I gather it's quite an experience, an association to go along with it.
It's amazing. It's a neat little organization.
It is, yeah. It really is.
And they've done a lot for kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Growing up on the farms, Gentlemen, what a treat.
Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate the inside view, and despite your sensitivities about the questions I might ask, Al, but thanks for bringing Bob back along, because it's not an industry that we're, those of us who've grown up in Red Deer are directly associated with it, but it's such a treat to be able to chat with you about it, even if it's a case of looking back, and you certainly make it add to the fact that a lot of us who grew up in Red Deer are pretty proud of it. And if we were given the choice of somewhere else, the answer would be categorically no
Staying
way.
here. Yeah.
And to interview people like yourselves who've been a part of that has been such a treat. From the Don Moores on down, and the Waskesiu Park system story and so on. But they're all people who had vision, took an idea, and made the most of it. And are just happy with, as you were saying,
happy to be
accomplishing what they did. Credit doesn't matter.
No.
That's a real characteristic about Red Deer. And I had always thought that the can-do attitude, if you're going to label a community in Alberta with that label, it would be Calgary. And I'm just so delighted to hear how Red Deer is just
I think
maybe
that
a
attitude's
smaller,
alive
but
and well
an example
everywhere.
of it.
Just got to give it a little chance to